Welcome to TRF Tuesday, our weekly mini workshop series with a variety of bright voices in therapeutic embodiment. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. It's the best way to let YouTube know that you find this content valuable and to show it to more people. I'm so pleased to introduce you to this week's host, Mariah Rooney. This is the fifth and last session in their series called On the Other Side of This or That, Breathing, Moving, and Knowing into a More Expansive Being. Mariah, whose pronouns are she and they, is a justice and collective liberation-oriented trauma therapist and embodiment practitioner. Her clinical experience includes work with children, adolescents, and adults in a variety of settings. As an embodiment practitioner, they have taught trauma-sensitive yoga, meditation, and other movement practices to trauma-impacted individuals and groups. Additionally, Mariah is a faculty member in the Graduate School of Social Work at Winona State University, a trauma-informed care consultant, is the co-founder and co-director of the Trauma-Informed Weightlifting, and was previously a fellow at the Trauma Center Justice Resource Institute. Take it away, Mariah.
All right. Thanks so much, Mary. And welcome, everyone. It's so fun to have folks from literally all over the world. And it's a joy to be back here for our last session together, at least with me in this series, before jumping into the rest of TRF Tuesdays. So I do want to take a moment at the beginning of today just to make an acknowledgement. And I recognize that this is both a live event and then also is recorded and will live on YouTube. So you can access this later or share it in any way that you want. But in naming that, I want to acknowledge that the events of the past week are having such an enormous impact on so many people, particularly in the US. And so I want to hold that the overturning of Roe versus Wade, as well as other events that have been happening in the US and around the world, just like in any given moment, when there are these huge, unsettling, destabilizing things that happen in our worlds and in our lives, that it has a direct impact on our well-being and on our nervous system. So one, I am so grateful that you're here and taking this time for yourself and that we can be together in this way, even virtually. And two, I think it really does connect up with what we're going to talk about today, which is how we experience and move through the world and move through space by orienting to our surroundings, to orienting to ourselves and to other people. And that one of the ways that we do that is by constantly sorting. And this happens unconsciously in the background, and it also happens consciously, where we're thinking like, is this person or this place safe or unsafe? Is it good or not good, right? And we've talked these last weeks about how there is a real need to do some sorting sometimes, to be able to label things, to help organize and make sense out of our experience. And also sometimes that can be an adaptation to trauma and to stress, and also just to the many ways that we're socialized in our families of origin and our cultures of origin, and that it can result in disconnect from ourselves, from aspects of our identities, from other people, from experiences. And so this series is really about how can we expand beyond that division, those binary constructs that tell us that there's really only maybe one or two ways of being. And that's some of what we'll lean into today. So I hope that you're caring for yourselves by being here. And I'm so grateful that you are showing up for yourself in this way and joining me and joining all of us. So let's talk a little bit about what in the world we mean when we say orienting. And, we orient for a couple of really basic reasons. One is as a defense in order to protect ourselves and to help alert us if something is unsafe or if something is dangerous, perhaps. And the other reason that we orient is really about curiosity and exploration, regulation, and pleasure. And so I'll just name, before diving into that a little bit further, that when we experience trauma or chronic stress, and also when we think about all of the many ways that we are socialized, again, within our families and our cultures, that tell us that we constantly need to be making that determination, safe or unsafe, good or bad, right? This or that, all those kinds of binary constructs and sorting. That sometimes our ability to orient in ways that are rooted in more curiosity and exploration and joy can be hindered because our nervous system tells us that we need to be more on alert. And so that's why we'll be really intentionally learning about our orienting responses today and then finding ways to leverage that response to help us be more present and to be more curious in our lives. So generally speaking, as I describe it, may seem like kind of a deceptively simple practice, but really when we intentionally leverage it, it can help us regulate, get grounded, feel more resourced, feel more present in our experience. And I think we all can probably benefit from a little more of that. So let's talk for just a second about what orienting is and how it works, so that you have that knowing going into a practice that we'll do together today. So there are muscles at the base of the skull, the suboccipital muscles, and those are a part of what's in the mix when we are orienting. So those muscles help us orient our head and our neck, our ears, right? Our orienting very much happens through our senses as well. It helps that defensive orienting that I talked about helps us turn towards something that we perceive or our system perceives as dangerous or some sort of threat. It also helps us orient towards ways that we can get away, escape routes for self-protection, that sort of things, other things that we might use for self-protection. And what happens when we experience trauma or a lot of trauma or hardship is that our defensive orienting response can start to get a little out of whack. It can be out of proportion, if you will, to the conditions in any present moment. Some of you may really connect with that. You know, for example, if we're kind of already heightened, let's say we're having a hard day, we're feeling anxious, something of that sort, we may notice that our startle response is a little heightened. Our bodies may freeze. We may breathe differently. And our gaze and our orienting response may be a bit hijacked towards threat, right? So it may be scanning a little bit more for things that could be potentially harmful to us, more so than normal, even if we are someplace safe. And so when we get stuck in that mode, it's helpful, again, to harness that response and then use it for our good and in service of ourselves. One of the ways that we do that is by intentionally engaging in more exploratory orienting. And this involves us engaging with curiosity, turning towards things in our environment, such as other people, right? So social connections, such as things that feed us literally, right? Or figuratively, that nourish us in some way, towards things that make us joyful or playful, things that are comforting, bring us some delight. And so another thing that's important to note, if you're familiar with polyvagal theory, from a polyvagal perspective, this whole response, the orienting response, also involves different muscles, different pieces of the face and the neck that are very much connected to our social engagement system. Okay. And this stimulates the ventral vagus nerve. And when the ventral vagus nerve is online, when we are connected in our social engagement system, it helps provide this connection between our faces and our hearts. And it can actually help regulate the pace, the rhythm of our heart. It can help slow our system down, kind of pump the brakes, if you will, so that we can be present in the moment and be connected with others. So you'll notice that one of the themes for today was about our connections and about relationships. So generally, when we're engaging and orienting in a way that's more exploratory, it means taking in the world around us through our senses. For example, if we're standing somewhere really beautiful in nature, being able to take in that view and be curious about what we're experiencing through our senses. Think about if you've ever had a moment where you stand somewhere. I was sitting somewhere the other night and there was this perfect combination of shade and wind and sun coming through the trees. And my body just had this lovely experience of orienting through my senses towards how pleasant that was, how lovely it was to be outside and to be noticing those things. So, we can also orient, not just when we're outside, but also when we're inside, and it happens unconsciously and in the background. And then also we can do it very intentionally, which we'll do together today. So for a moment, before we dive into the practice, I mentioned earlier that our families of origin and our cultures of origin teach us all kinds of things, both consciously and unconsciously, about that influence how we orient, about what we orient towards or away from, about who we perceive as safe, or who we perceive as unsafe. And so there are lots of ways that you can probably think that that might show up for you. And it's going to be very culturally dependent, depend on where you live and your family and all kinds of different factors. But for example, we are socialized and we're taught to sort people based on their bodies, what their bodies look like, based on race, based on gender, height, size, even hair color, right? There's all of these different physical features and identities that we are socialized to believe are safe or unsafe. And some of those are deeply rooted in things like racism. And so it is also a practice, an anti-oppressive practice to engage in orienting in ways that allow us to be connected and to acknowledge those kinds of voices or forces as they come up. They happen often very unconsciously. And so we have to notice them in order to be able to shift them. So it's also a really important step for us as we, for those of us who are seeking to deepen into that work. And I'll share an example to bring that to life. Some years ago, I worked with a colleague who, when I met them, the way that they dressed and presented themselves was fundamentally different than me. And there were some assumptions that I made based on how they dressed, that about their lifestyle and what they liked in terms of music and the kinds of people they hung out with, all these different things. And I had written this whole story, right? And that story was connected to how I had been raised and socialized. And, I just made assumptions like, this isn't someone that's probably ever going to be interested in talking to me or hanging out with me. I can't imagine we have much in common, even though I really respected them and enjoyed them and found them to be so wonderful. And the reality is that this is now one of my dearest friends. And while some of those things might be true, we have such a lovely and beautiful relationship. And my orienting response initially didn't really allow me to even hold enough curiosity for the possibility for that to be true. So as we think about how we can use this as a practice to be in more connection with others, and to be open and curious about others, I hope that can open some doors for you as it has for me as well. So we'll do this activity together, and then I'll also just plant some seeds and say that there are lots of times and ways that we can consciously engage in orienting practices: when we wake up in the morning, when we leave our homes, when we arrive somewhere, or if we find ourselves kind of getting lost in the moment, or if we become dissociative or dysregulated in some way, that this can be really helpful. So that being said, let's go ahead and do a little of this together. And, one of the cool things is that there's no right or wrong way to do this. And if we do something and that doesn't feel good for you, that's okay. There's no need to do it. So everything is just an offering. Everything's an invitation. Nothing's a requirement. And you're not doing anything wrong along the way. Just do things that work for you. So what I'll invite you to do, if you're inside in this moment, and you'll do it pretty similarly if you're outside as well, is we're going to start by orienting with our eyes, and your head is going to naturally follow. But what we're going to do first is just notice what it's like in our bodies, and I'll demonstrate this. It'll look a little strange. To keep your body still, but just see what happens as you allow your eyes to kind of wander and move around space without turning your head or your neck. So you'll just see, what are your eyes drawn to? Is there anything that they want to look away from? Is there anything that your eyes are drawn to that seems pleasurable, pleasant? Just noticing what happens as you do that. And sometimes I find it helpful to close my eyes for a moment, or even to blink them a few times to kind of hit the reset button a little bit. And then this time I'll invite you to do the same thing, but to allow your head to move along with your gaze, with your eyes. So go ahead and let your eyes go wherever they want to go. And as you do this, it's going to be different for each of you. Some of you may be drawn to objects or things that are really kind of close to you, close within your sight, close to your body. Others of you may find yourself looking far away. There's some distance that's available to you. So you'll notice all kinds of things like, where does your gaze go? What's it drawn to? What does it move away from? Do you notice anything that happens in your body? as it lands on certain things, as it takes in the space around you. You may also choose to look up and to look down, whatever pace works for you, and side to side, as well as maybe allowing your head to turn, and you can look behind you in both directions. And I recognize too that depending on your body, some of these movements or motions may work for you and some may not. So just make any adjustment that you need to. So simply allowing your eyes to really notice what they notice. Okay. And then when it feels right, allow your eyes to land, to rest on an object for a while. Okay, so if you're outside, allowing your eyes to land on something outside. If you're inside, anywhere that you are, let your eyes rest on some object. And allow it to just stay there, tuning into what might show up or shift in your body, when you're breathing, just noticing how this feels for you. Take a moment. And as you do this, allow yourself to also, if you haven't already, to begin to orient through your other senses. So we'll start with things that you hear as you're gazing at this object, noticing if there are any sounds that your body's taking in and processing. What do you find yourself drawn to in terms of sound? Do you pay attention to particular sounds? Do you let others fade into the background? Notice maybe if there are any sounds that feel kind of pleasant or enjoyable to you. Allow yourself to take those in. Take a moment here. And when you feel ready, you may allow your eyes to begin to look around again. You can let your head kind of swivel, and or your body may even turn or shift a little bit as you take the space in. And see, maybe you even notice something you didn't notice before. I'm noticing this light that I didn't notice before. And just noticing what you notice. Again, sounds are coming in. There may be smells. And then we'll bring in some more of your sensory experience using touch. As you do this, you may get curious. Again, if you're outside or you're inside, are there things that you can do to orient through touch? Right? Are there surfaces that you can touch? Move your hand along, noticing what that feels like. Are there textures that your body feels drawn to that feel pleasurable or enjoyable to you or your body? So I'm kind of looking around this space here as I do it, noticing the chair that I'm sitting on, this table. You may notice temperature differences, texture differences, things that your body likes or maybe doesn't like so much. Simply noticing. And if your body lands somewhere that it wants to stay, your gaze, sense of sound, or touch, feel free to just let it land there and to stay there. Note too that orienting can feel really nice, and sometimes it can feel a little uncomfortable, and it can feel particularly uncomfortable if we have some survival strategies that are kind of stored or stuck in our body. That orienting response may kind of kick off a desire or a need to leave, to flee, or different things. So if you notice that coming up, then you may really intentionally bring your attention to something that makes you feel safe, or just noticing the space around you and where you are. There's no right or wrong, bad or good, anything here. And allowing your experience to be whatever it is. And if your body feels a need to move, you can even invite some movement into your orientation. So you may, reach behind you and see how your body orients in space as you invite a little movement. And you can stand up and walk around if that feels helpful and orienting for your body. I'm going to continue. And then if you feel ready, or if you feel like you would like to, I'll invite you to pause for a moment. And again, allow yourself to orient towards something that feels kind of neutral, or maybe even pleasant or pleasurable. You can do that with any or all of your senses. And so part of what we are exploring today is how we engage in sorting and separating and labeling in ways that can sometimes result in disconnection from others. And so without judgment, I'll just invite you to notice and be curious about, is there any awareness that comes up about how you perhaps orient towards people or away from people for any number of reasons, right? It may be identity-based, it may be how they present themselves. And then holding this stance of no judgment, just of curiosity, wondering what might that mean in terms of an opportunity for connection and for curiosity. And what happens is in this moment, you're orienting towards something that is neutral or pleasant. Can you imagine doing this while you go about your day and move throughout the world to invite more moments for connection? When you walk down the street or through the grocery store and you allow yourself perhaps to maybe look up, to notice someone, to maybe allow yourself to find a little smile, even a little nod, just a simple acknowledgement that you're sharing space. Here you are, human to human in that moment. And perhaps that might feel scary or hard or new for you, and that's okay too. So just taking a moment to kind of let in how this can serve as a resource for you as a practice. Perhaps identifying a moment in the day or some ritual that you might be able to create around orienting as you wake up into your day, as you transition from place to place. I find it really helpful to do this as I shift from kind of one mode or one part of my life into another. So from work to not work, or from not work to work. Or if I'm kind of running through my day and feeling on edge, it might feel good for me to do this as for example, I go into the grocery store, and something I may do is orient towards something pleasant as I walk in. The smell in the produce section, that feels really pleasant to me. Or noticing flowers that are for sale outside the store, plants, something that allows my nervous system to regulate and connect with feelings of presence and groundedness and safety. So I'm going to pause there and just remind you that this is a way to help ourselves get into a more resilient space and to provide some regulation and eventually some healing and settling for our nervous systems. And to engage in this ongoing deconstruction that we've been exploring around all the ways that we move through the world connecting with binary constructs that really may not serve us, and how we can be much more expansive and welcoming and curious as we do that. And this is one way to go about being in practice around that. So I hope that was helpful, and I have so enjoyed sharing this with you. This is something that I really enjoy as a practice for myself and with my clients. And yeah, so I'll just pause, and I know we have some space and time for questions or observations, things of that sort. So Miriam, I'll pause there.
Thanks, Mariah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I noticed for myself, I started to check out a little. You know, when I was looking around, I started to just sort of go off into my own, just to dissociate just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just even noticing that, right? Like that sometimes when we start to orient to our space or to the present moment, our system might get a little overwhelmed and say, oh, hey, I don't want to be here right now. I want to check out a little bit, or I want to zone out or zoom out to something else. So just even noticing that is exactly it, right? There's the opportunity, if it feels right for us in that moment, that we can use that orienting response, the muscles in our neck and where we turn, where we look, where we lean, where we move, to help us resource and connect.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All of the sessions have been really enlightening, and really, for me, they've been really eye-opening. The contrast in general with this and that has just been really great. I'm so glad that we did this series, and hopefully you'll come back and do another one next year with us. That would be great.
Absolutely. I would love to. Yeah. And I'm glad that you found, I hope that other folks found it helpful too. I mean, I find it to be so liberating to notice how we inherit these constructs, right? These binaries that we're constantly kind of separating and sorting, and it's also a form of disconnection. And so how can we heal some of that so that we can have a much more expansive, curious way of understanding ourselves and other people and our experiences, from our sensations to our identities and our bodies and our feelings and beliefs, all these different things.
Mm-hmm. If anyone has a question, we have a minute or two. We can take some questions. Emily said that was great for my nervous system. Thank you. If there's any if there's any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them.
Oh, that's such a good question. Thank you, Mary. One, for your work, and I'm just finishing reading the question. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think so the question is about, as an example in social services, if you're moving from some kind of yucky or challenging situations and then having to go to another, might this be a helpful practice in between? Yes, absolutely. Because part of what happens is our system carries residue with it, right? So it'll carry, quote unquote, lessons learned and say, see, we just saw this thing here, which means in any other situation, we have to orient towards or away from that thing. And then that doesn't leave us in a space to be open and curious about something that's new. There are absolutely times when we do have to carry some of that information forward for our safety, and that's important. But having a presence that allows us to determine if that applies or not is important. And so I think that's a lovely idea. Perhaps it's when you get in your car or before you get out of your car if you're driving. And it can just be about taking in your surroundings. Where are you now? Right? Where am I now? Where am I headed? Where am I going? So that's a great question. Thanks, Mary.
Any other questions or comments from Mariah? This is our last session with her. You can find more about her. I've posted her websites in the chat. And you will receive a feedback form in a couple of days. We'd love for you to fill out the feedback form. Mariah really appreciates hearing what your comments are, what your feedback is for the program. Marissa says this was so simple and liberating.
Oh, good. Simplicity. We need more simplicity these days.
Yeah.
So that's so wonderful to hear. And I just want to say thank you, to TRF for having me. So thank you, Mary, and the TRF crew for having me. And also thank you for joining me. For those of you who are just joining today or joined us for some or all of the last handful of weeks, it's such a joy to be in space with you all. So
thank you. We loved having you. Thank you so much. Devin says it seems like this would be good for discretion. Mary very much appreciates and enjoyed this very much. Lots of thank yous. Thanks for sharing. Well, we're going to come to a close, and I'd like to let you know that our next session of TRF Tuesday will be July 19th. We'll be off for the next 2 weeks. So on July 19th, we'll be meeting Decrute. That's it. I think we're great to close. There's a couple more comments. It's always tough to know, do we finish, on time, or do we keep reading comments? I just want to say that Veronica has said, orienting seems like a normal response. It's so helpful to bring it into awareness and to be used to balance and connect. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah. And just even noticing that we orient, right? Like it's such an unconscious thing that's happening in the background all the time. So to bring our conscious awareness to that process and then be able to pull on that lever and leverage it as we need to is can be really empowering.
Yeah, really empowering. Thanks, Mariah. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Take really good care of yourselves.